All right. Hello, everyone. I'll give up on the good evening, good morning, whatever, because of time differences. Welcome to the second of our seminars on the Internet of Things capstone project. This evening, we'll have a bit of a chat about some items which are coming up in the assessment, what needs to be done in the next few weeks, and something on the pricing structures you should be looking at. All right. Again, please note meetings will be recorded and posted to YouTube. I've already put up a link to the playlist now, so you should just need to subscribe to that if you want to have a look. So the link is there. This evening we'll be going through the requirements for the next 2 weeks and probably a little bit further on. Now, we haven't received any emails directly. Has everyone got answers to their queries? If not, if you could pop something in the chat, we'll sort that out after we've had our little chat. Just reiterating, use the IoT capstone email address and put the person you think would be best suited to help in the subject line. That'll just speed things up. If it's someone else, we'll sort that out. Also want to make sure everyone's in teams. The teams play an important role in peer support. We've got a wide range of people enrolled in the course, just under 50 at the moment. And it's useful to be able to talk to someone, one of your peers, particularly in areas that are not your strength. So we've got people who are very technical. We've got engineers, software engineers, programmers, a large number of very technical people, but we also have people who are more on the business side. So if you're a techie, you might be great putting the prototype together, but you might struggle a bit with the business aspect side, such as the costing or the marketing, market research, etc. So you can rely on or you can ask the business people to give you a hand, and in return, as a techie person, you can give them help with the technical aspects and vice versa. It's worth noting that we don't necessarily expect a full prototype to be developed in this course. That may not be your strength. We can look at the business plan and how you're approaching the design and work towards how you would communicate to engineers to get your prototype developed. The ability to know what's possible, what's not possible, the right terminology to use so that there's less chance of having a mix-up. Last little thing, it's always handy if you pick an imaginative name for your device or solution. It's nice and descriptive. It helps focus on the main aspect of what you're trying to design. So try and pick out a nice name, post it in the discussions, and we can get some entertainment from that. No, seriously, it is worthwhile having a reasonable name, particularly when it comes to having a focus on what you're trying to develop. Okay, so this fortnight, you should be working on Canvanizer. Main issues here and what we'd actually be assessing on, it's not COVID, I hope. No, it's not. Is the problem. It's best to pick out the top 3 problems your IoT device will address. And the reason we say 3 is it's a nice number that you can focus on, it's doable, and you shouldn't be trying to specify much more than that. Otherwise, you'll end up in a situation where you get scope creep. Scope creep is where you find something as you're working along and you say, oh, this would be nice in my prototype. So you add that as a feature, and then as you work further, you find something else. You add that feature, and you keep adding features until you reach the point where you can never actually develop anything, right? Because there's just too much in it. And that's something to be very, very careful of. What you really need to do in commercialization or the commercialization process is to get a workable device out and into the community as quickly as possible. The sales from this initial device then funds all of these extra features that you can plan to build in later. So try and keep the problems to a limited number. 3 is a good idea. You'll need to examine your customer segments. This is the target audience for your specific IoT device. And this can be in many forms. It could be direct users, so targeting end users. It could be industry. So if you're developing something to use in, as we had this morning, the coffee processing industry, you wouldn't be selling to end users, you would be selling to other processors of coffee. So you need to know exactly who you're going to be selling to. or are you going to wholesale to other distributors? This becomes critical in the pricing structure as well, which we'll get to later. But if you're dealing through wholesalers, you need to allow enough margin for yourself in the costing structure so that you can stay in business. But you also need to allow for their retail margins on top of that. So it can become an expensive exercise. A key point here is a unique value proposition. This is a single compelling message about why your IoT is different and worth buying. Remember, no matter what sort of market you're heading into, what sort of device you're looking at, you need to be able to explain to potential users why they should buy yours and not the one from Apple. I tend to use Apple as an example in these quite a lot because they've got really, really good marketing. Products really don't matter, but people will buy Apple because it's Apple, much like IBM in the 20th century. So you need to know what reasons there are for people to select your solution rather than someone else's. Again, to do with the design creep and trying not to get design creep moving into your prototype, pick the top 3 features of your IoT idea and concentrate on those. As I mentioned, knowing your customer is important, and once you know who your customer is going to be, you need to work out the channels that you can use to market and sell to your clients. This has become a little bit more complex in some ways and a little simpler in others. With the advent of the internet, a small company anywhere in the world can sell to any other client or customer anywhere else in the world as well. This is very different to the early days where we could only really work in limited markets. I mentioned this morning I used to have a manufacturing business in very, very early robotics, manufacturing computerized engraving machines and sign writing machines. And we could develop these systems, and they were horrendously expensive because we could only sell them in the local market. We had no leverage to get outside of Western Australia and to Australia and to a limited extent. And the machines, which really didn't cost a huge amount to build, sold for very large sums of money because we knew we couldn't get large volume sales. We had to recoup our money on a few sales. Now it's very different. You can deal directly with consumers on a global scale, even if you're only a very small company. We've got a very successful one here called New Hera, and they developed an earbud system which works like normal earbuds, but additionally it does hearing protection and can act as a hearing aid. Its unique value proposition is that you don't need an audiologist to set up the hearing aid part. You can do all this from home. So they sell on that basis, and because you don't need an audiologist, they can sell at 1/10 of the price of your traditional hearing aid supplier. Now they're marketing globally from a very small R&D company in Perth, Western Australia. So they've got a very good distribution direct to the customer by using a web presence, and they advertise quite heavily. Cost structure is also critically important, and you need to be looking at this point. Look at the types of costs involved in developing your IoT idea. This is not as simple as it sounds because it also depends very much on the reason you're developing your system. If you're developing it from a purely commercial perspective, you'll want to recoup all of your costs plus margin and other overheads. So your price would include all of your research and development hours, all of the test equipment that you bought to be able to build your prototype, cost of this course, everything else you can think of that allowed you to get to a commercial point. From that, you then have to allow for your normal overheads, rent, administrative costs. Very importantly, you need to allow for warranty costs, cost of repairs and replacement, and you need to build in a cost for maintenance and improvement of your idea. So you can't just sell IoT device version 1. You'll sell whatever's available in the market, and then you'll have no more sales. So you've got to keep improving the device, and to do that, you've got to be having an income stream and a profit level high enough. Excuse me, my dog's walking around. Profit level large enough to enable you to reinvest in the company and build its production, its research, its product range, etc. The one that's a little bit different is if you're doing this for philanthropic purposes. So, for example, you're developing an IoT device that works on monitoring the health and gait and well-being of a guide dog, a person with a vision impairment, using a dog to guide them around. That's more of a philanthropic idea. And in that case, you may not include your research and development costs that may have been funded some other way. It may be something you're doing just for your own personal interest. You may not need to make a profit per se directly to yourself, but you will still need to make a profit to enable you to cover warranty, returns, support, product development, product improvement. So you still need to allow that profitability to be increased. One of the big problems with scope creep is how it impacts your costing. So as you add more features to a device, your production cost and research cost goes up, which means your end product cost goes up. It means you can't sell for a longer period of time, so you need to increase your profits to recover the time lost in the production. So again, another very good reason to avoid any scope creep. Revenue streams are very important. How are you going to fund this? If you're in a startup position, you can look for venture capitalism, and we touch on that a little bit more later on. If it's a philanthropic, we can look at grants and other donations for revenue stream. There's always Kickstarter and those sort of things as well. But also look at how you're going to repay that. And so even for Kickstarter and other venture capitalists, you need to recoup the money that they've lent you in some way. Venture capitalists will take a percentage of your business, usually a very large percentage of your business. Startup aids like Kickstarter, you need to return something to the people who've funded your device. So it may mean you have to give away several of the devices once you get into the manufacture stage. That is a real cost, so you need to keep that in mind as well. We also need to set some metrics, milestones. How are we going to measure if we are successful or not? Now, there's a very interesting school of thought now that treats things a little bit differently. And in IoT development, this is a fairly common sort of way to go. Some of our very traditional mining companies are now working in this paradigm. And it sounds odd, but it's fail fast, fail often. What this allows you to do is take an idea, prototype it, run a hackathon, however you're going to do it, get something out rapidly to try, see if it's actually going to be successful or have a chance of being successful. And if it's not, drop it and move on to the next thing. This allows us to make lots of changes. We can be quick and responsive, agile, and Hannes will hate me using that term like that, in our developments. And it's actually quite a good way when you're in very early stages of prototype. Give it a shot. If it doesn't look like working, give up, move on to the next thing that might actually succeed. But anyway, metrics, measurable milestones, having a prototype, having the communication working, solid things you can say, yes, this is achieved, now I can move on to the next. In all projects, it's critically important that you have a sequence of events to go through. And we do talk more about this in the project management parts. But if you try and approach everything all at once, you'll actually get very little done. You need to set these milestones so that, right, first I'm going to get the sensor data from that sensor. Next, I'm going to process that sensor data. Next, I'm going to make the transmission protocol work. So you can work on one thing at a time, get it working before you move on to the next bit. Okay, and the last one on this page is unfair advantage. And this is a key advantage of your IoT idea. For example, can't be easily copied. Now, what we'll be doing is creating this, I've got a mental blank, what's it called? Canvanizer document. And this is a living document. We use this throughout the Capstone project to direct us in what we're doing next. Now, this means you can also change it. So as you think of things that are relevant, you can add them into this. This will assist you in preparing your final report, which is where a large part of your marks will come from. And by keeping this up to date, it'll allow you to record what you've done, what you plan to do, and what achievements you have throughout, and then bring that across into your final report. So examples there, our old snore stop, which we've used throughout the course. We have the problem that we're trying to solve. We have the unique value proposition, which is critical to its success. We have the channels, we have certain metrics in there, the cost structures we're going to use and what we count in there, and all the other things we've talked about. This is a very brief one. We would expect a little bit more, of course, from the students' submissions. And again, remind me, Savash, due this week? Okay, he'll tell us in a minute. So please, if you've got any issues with that, email us, ask, talk about it after we've been through this bit, and we'll see if we can help you out. Okay, you'll also be looking at a market research and costing plan. This is where you go into details, and it will help you consolidate your own ideas. These decisions will need to be made before you can complete the plan, such as determining the business structure. Is it not-for-profit? And I'll say it again, not-for-profit doesn't mean you're not going to make a profit. It just means you reinvest the profit in the business itself, rather than withdrawing for shareholders or personal gain. So you need to still have that structure in place. You need to know what way you're working. And you should know the demand for your products or services. Now, to do this, it's key that you know the industry and the environment you're going to be selling in, and in which your business will operate. And they've got a few of these coming up in a minute to show you what I mean. A good way to get an idea of this is the good old internet again. Ask Mr. Google. Search for items which are similar, looking for keywords. Keywords are key, because when you go to the next stage and you start looking for what other people have actually done in the area, a great place to start is patent searches, and you'll need the keywords to put into the patent search to get reasonable results from it, or understandable results. I've put in the Australian one. Everyone can access that, ipaustralia.gov.au. It's a good place to start. And the patent site on Google is also not too bad. Patents are an interesting thing. In most countries, they were set up, and still are, there so that you can get access to other people's ideas legally, legitimately. And when you find a patent that's already solved a problem that you want to solve, you then contact that patent holder and you make a mutually agreeable arrangement with them to use that knowledge. Unfortunately, in some markets, it's become exactly the opposite. It's become a system of stopping anyone using your technology. But it was originally envisaged to allow a centralized place for the sharing of techniques so that everyone could make use of them. But patents are an important part of any development and doing a patent search. This section is looking at the industry analysis, and there's a couple of key factors you should look at. First one there is political. There's a lot of political aspects which may affect your particular device and how you can implement and where you can sell it. Medical is one example of that, where it's highly regulated. You'll have to go through different processes through different systems, different countries. There's also the straightforward political, such as the access to information we have in China. The Chinese government doesn't give free access to everything by default. So if you're intending to sell into China and you're making use of some other service external to China, you have to be aware of that situation. For example, you cannot access Blackboard, our learning management system, from China. So when we try to teach into China for students there, we have all kinds of trouble with it being blocked. So our educational product, we have to find another way to sell into China. So there's political and legal factors, regulatory factors that you need to be aware of. Of course, there's economic factors that could affect your business, exchange rates, inflation, access to capital, how easily you can get money. Probably the big ones for us in Australia is the availability of labour, distribution and cost of labour. Australia isn't a manufacturing country because we're a developed country. We have very high wages relative to other places in the world. So if something is labour intensive, it's very, very difficult to be profitable in Australia. We've also got a very small population. So again, we don't have a lot of surplus labour. Skilled labour is very expensive and quite hard to find. So we've got a very different situation to many other countries. We're also very isolated, and it's expensive to export. The cost of getting to another market because of the distance is significant. There's social aspects we have to be aware of. Population growth, demographics. Developed countries have a great deal of problem in the aging population. The aging population tends to want to live independently, whereas in some developing countries, it's more traditional for family to look after aging parents, and therefore there's less call for technology to support the aging population than there is in developed countries. So if you're working on something that solves an issue with Alzheimer's and dementia, you'd really want to be marking that towards developed countries and working out where your market channels, excuse me, I've got a real tickle in the throat, and how your marketing and distribution channels can work in developed countries. Whereas if you're looking at something like a past student did, which was the monitoring and safety of a shower head water heater. It's a water heater that fits on the shower head. He's looking at only countries where that particular style of water heater is used. So he'd have to be fairly specific in where he spends his effort and his time building the channels to distribute and get that product out. There's the industry things, specific things that you need to be very aware of course. It's fairly obvious, I think. But what are the future trends affecting industry? Again, because I'm more familiar with it, I'll use the Australian example. And we're mostly a mining and agricultural economy. Our labour costs are extremely high. Mining used to be labour intensive, but now everything is moving to automation. So if you're looking at a market to work in IoT and automation, mining is one that stands out in our particular environment. Even the very traditional mining companies are moving towards industrial IoT, Industry 4.0, and a whole heap of other buzzwords. And this is to do with the automation. It's worker safety. Again, Australia's very, very keen on worker safety, and companies spend vast amounts of money ensuring that their workplaces are as safe as possible. And by removing humans from that hostile environment, that's probably the best thing you can do as far as safety goes. So safety in mining, automation, great markets for Australian companies to be moving into. And I'm certain that in every other country, there will be something which is changing rapidly, is a major economic factor in that country. Like we had two people, wasn't it, Sebash, from Colombia this morning. And of course, they were working on coffee processing. And that is one of the major things there. So they would be familiar with the coffee processing. In fact, they both work in it, and how that industry is changing and automating and becoming more technically enabled. My apologies for the coughing. So one key part of this is to look at your competitors. Now, this is again is crucially important to understand what your competitors are doing, and where their strengths are and where their weaknesses are, so that you can target your appliance within a certain market segment. So we suggest you draw up a table something like this. Look at the competitor name, the date they were established. So how long have they been in business? If they're new, there's a good opportunity there. You can actually get in because they're new, you're new, so they don't have that advantage. How is the product going to compete with yours? How is it similar? How is it dissimilar? And how competitive is it? Now, I again like to use Apple as a good example here. If we look at the product and we do those new iTags or whatever they're called, the location tags that they've only just released. How competitive is that product? They're expensive, but they have a lot of brand reputation behind them. So people know Apple produce high quality, reliable, easy to use devices, and that's what you're going to be competing against. So you need to know what the strengths and weaknesses of the competition is. Their market share. If you're up against someone, say like Microsoft, they still have about 90% of the PC operating system market. That's very, very hard to break into, as Apple found out, and as Linux is still finding out, and probably will do for many, many moons to come. It's very hard to make ground against the mainstream. However, if you can offer that unique value to your customers, you've got a way to get in. And that usually means if you're up against someone who has very large market share, you need to find a niche within that market that you're unique to. So if we were looking at the iTags, for example, and Apple hasn't got any market share at the moment, there is no real market. But say they got to the point where they had 98% market like they did with iPhone. You would need to come up with something that is unique. For instance, a device that communicates to medical equipment, which will allow us to track wheelchairs and dialysis machines and those drip pumps that they have throughout a hospital system. And because it can communicate with those and check battery status and something else, we've got a unique tag. And we're going for a very small market segment in medical equipment. So you use this market share as a basis of, am I going for the mass of the market? Am I going for a niche or somewhere in between? And that leads into your pricing. If you know you're only going to have a niche market, so very few devices to be sold, you need to make more money per device. So this is all linked together. The unique value of the competitor. Why are people buying Apple products? Is it quality, convenience, price, service? Well, with Apple, it's quality. Yeah, they're not very friendly. It's certainly not price. So you could go in knowing what the value is to the customer and say, right, they're not offering a good price. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in nice and cheap. Okay, it won't be as pretty or it won't be as long living, but we're going to be a lot cheaper than them. So by knowing what the value offered to customers by your competitors is, you know where your market can sit. What are the main strengths? I use the example again of Apple. If I want to just make a phone call on my phone, I use an iPhone, right? Because it's easy to use, straightforward, reliable, and is pretty. It's nice. However, if I'm going to develop an app for some very specific purpose, like tracking human movement in the wrist with kids with cerebral palsy, there you go, got a plug-in for you, Savash. I would use an Android phone because their strength is in the openness, whereas the weakness in Apple is everything is closed, but very easy to develop for. So understanding what the strengths are, again, gives you a way of entering the market. And of course, same goes with the weaknesses. So look at the strengths and weaknesses, and where their strengths are, you stay away from. Where their weaknesses are, that's where you attack. Okay, so we need to then look at a costing plan. Now, there's a really good site I found, hopefully it's still live, I should check, that talks about different ways of working out how you're going to price your end device. You need to describe the products and service, compare to competitors, which is what we just did, and get across to the customer the benefits of your solution. Now, as I've already mentioned, you need to look at the recovery of your research and development, R&R, that should be R&D, sorry. That is critically important. If you're going to recoup it, your costs are going to go up quite dramatically. How many hours have you spent in this course? It's probably a couple of hundred, a few hundred by the time you're finished. Your salary has to be accounted for. So you've got to count at least 6 months' salary just to recover the cost of this course. All right, so the R&D costs are very, very high. That then has to be spread over the amount of this device you think you're going to sell. So if we go back to that previous one and we're looking at our niche market, where we're only going to sell a certain number of items, we have to apply this research and development cost across all of those devices that we are going to sell over the next X number of years. It's absolutely critical, particularly if you're doing this as a commercial enterprise, that you apply this cost recovery. Otherwise, one day you'll go broke because you're spending money you don't have. Probably the other extreme of that is our philanthropic. And philanthropic pricing, you might say, as I said, you're not going to look at the research development cost because it was funded by grants, your goodwill, you inherited it off somebody else, and other ways of actually doing the R&D. However, you still need to have a profit built in to maintain your product, to improve your product, to cover your warranty repairs, your servicing costs, your administration costs, and these have to be built in and again, priced across however many you expect to sell. All right, so even if you're doing it for all the best reasons in the world, you still need to add the overheads and the continuation costs onto the price of the device. If you're doing something internally, you would price things differently. it's the return on investment. And there's a good spiel on that webpage. But we target a certain return on investment. So if we're investing $100,000 of our company's money into developing this, you must prove that there is $100,000 worth of value coming back out the other end. But I would recommend you have a read of this article. It does go through these different types of pricing structures, and that's useful in the report you'll be writing. Okay, last info bit I just wanted to go through was a good old-fashioned SWOT analysis. These have been around for years and years and years, and it's expected you'll do one of these. And all it is looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So on your own business and how you're going to market this, look at the strengths, and that can be drawn from the Canvanizer that you did earlier. Again, a lot of these documents are going to be linked. Create your Canvanizer, which is a great way to workshop ideas and have a think and change and test ideas. Your costing report will sort of firm that up a little bit. And then the SWOT analysis will look at the different ways and things you've got to be aware of. So this will be very useful, and it will be expected if you ever want to present this to investors. First thing investors want to see is a SWOT analysis. So very important thing to be doing. Okay, so last little bit, week 4 tasks, because we will be approaching week 4 by the time we meet up again. We want to make sure that you've joined a topic team and posted your idea in the discussion board and provide a little bit of feedback to your team members. If the team is really small, we'll probably merge some and move you across, just so that there's at least 3 or 4 people in each team. So we want to have everyone's sorted out by then. You've already decided on which web conference you're going to join, so that's all good. Watch the product development videos and use these to start thinking about the development plan. And I'll stress again, a very large part of any capstone project or real development, the development in the real world, is project management. If you can't manage the project, if you can't set the milestones, the chances are you're not going to be successful in developing a prototype or getting something to market. And also populate your Canvanizer template. And once you've submitted, this is your first assessment, worth 10% of the total mark. Okay, so that's all I wanted to talk about this evening. But now the interesting part, we would like to hear from you guys. And I'll just get out of this and stop sharing my screen. Because the purpose of these meetings is not for us to talk at you. We'll have a few little interesting topics coming up. So, Ash, you doing the one next week? You're muted still. You're muted. Anyway, I still can't hear. Not to worry. But anyway, so Ash will be doing a talk on selecting embedded systems and the development cycle, much more technical than what we've just been through now. And we've got other things which are just there to start triggering conversation. So what we'd really like to know is, before we do that, we've got a few new people along, so we'll do a quick intro of the instructors here. And if you didn't last fortnight, introduce yourself and say what your project is, we'll give you a chance to do that now too. So Ian Murray, embedded systems, networking, IoT, specializing mostly in medical applications. Yeah, so you know me from the course anyway. Hannes, our algorithm man.
Yeah, hi, I'm Hannes, our algorithm man. I'm from computing, which is in the same school as Ian and Siavash. My background is in mathematical and computational logic, so I also do a bit of AI, the genetic algorithm stuff, rather than the deep learning, and also a bit of databases and things. I'm not the best programmer in the world, but if you want to talk about the algorithms and designs behind them and stuff, I'm very happy to help.
Thank you. Savash.
Is my audio coming through now?
Yep.
Okay, good. Hi, everyone. I work with Ian and Hannes. My background is in electrical engineering, and I teach lots of embedded system, digital design, and small electronic type units. My research, as Ian mentioned, I look at tracking human movement and more specifically looking at modulating hand and wrist movement for children with cerebral palsy using inertial measurement units. So if you ever had any questions about the low-level firmware coding, embedded system, choosing a platform, choosing sensors, I'd be the guy to ask.
Okay, and last but not least of those here, Yiffy.
Hi, I'm also from the same school, and my background is also about the embedded system, IoT stuff, but I'm specialized in the wireless communication and network engineering, as well as the reinforcement learning, one type of the machine learning algorithm. And at the moment, with the help from Sarwash and Professor Yin, we are organizing an industrial IoT lab at our university.
Thank you. And for two who aren't here tonight, they've got other teaching commitments. There is Valerie Maxwell, who's our guru on Python, data science, big data. So if you've got questions on that area, Val is the one to speak to. And Dr. David McMeekin, who is a software engineer by trade, but specialises in location awareness, location-based services, geographical information systems and mapping. So if you're looking to build location into your IoT device, David's the guy to speak to. Now, has anyone not introduced themselves? If you haven't, please raise your hand or put a comment in, and Savash can run that.
Yes. So Yannick, do you want to go ahead first?
Thank you. My name is Yannick Mvoudi. I'm an electrical engineer by training. So I work in the energy industry. So my world is smart grid, smart metering, and energy optimization. Yeah, so that's about me. And the project I selected for this capstone is a toilet paper management system or monitoring system. I had another idea about that is more related to my field, but because it's a very commercial project, I chose not to use it in this platform so that I wanted to have to use something open that everyone can discuss. So basically, what the system does is I've noticed that in many public toilets in South Africa, in malls, shopping centers, I've noticed that normally it's very, when I go there, normally I don't find toilet papers, right? That's where the project basically, that's where I got the idea. And I didn't know why, but that's the reality I faced. And then I asked a few questions. People told me that it gets stolen, and other people told me that also there is a manual monitoring process. So the cleaner will have to come every 2 hours or every 3 hours. And if that doesn't happen as often as it should, then that will result in toilet paper shortage. So I sort of having a system that will monitor how many toilet paper are left, because most of the dispensers have got more than one. And when we reach maybe a threshold, one toilet paper, then it will send a message to the cloud, and the cloud will basically alert the cleaning staff. But the system could also be used by the suppliers of toilet papers to check how much toilet paper is being used and how much it should supply to the client or to the building on a monthly basis or weekly basis. So
that's a remarkably good idea. People underestimate the importance of sanitation because most people have got decent sanitation, but it may sound like a trivial idea, but it is actually a really, really good one. A simple thing like that can make a huge difference to the hygiene of the populace. So yeah, good one. Who's next?
I think Eduardo.
yeah, thank you.
Go ahead.
That's me. Thank you all. So yes, I missed the first meeting because I have a full-time job. So unfortunately, I couldn't free myself for that. And yes, I am Eduardo. I'm based in Italy at the moment, and I work for a coffee machine manufacturer, and I'm involved in the IoT project of the company. I have a background in agriculture and environmental management. And to be honest, the first time I got across the IoT is where I used to live in Sydney. And yeah, in Sydney, I had the first approach with IoT linked to green walls and green facades. So my idea coming back to Italy is, in my area, I live in the countryside, so it's quite focused in agriculture products. But in recent years, due to mismanagement and climate change as well, we are experiencing heavy harvest loss. So my idea was to develop a system to build in greenhouses, which will allow the owner of the greenhouses to monitor the internal environment of the greenhouse itself in comparison with the external one. So it can suggest adjustment in light, temperature, and humidity based on the external values of on the external weather itself. So I realized that, thank you for the presentation you gave before, Professor Murray, because I got some of the part of the galvanizer completely wrong. So I need to start working on that again. And basically, that's my main idea, to allow food producers to cut the costs and especially to cut the loss of harvest due to raw mismanagement.
Good. It's agriculture is another growth industry, particularly automated agriculture. So if you can do less human inspection, it's major savings, particularly in the Australian environment with well, with COVID, we can't get anyone to harvest, and it's too expensive to get regular wage earners to come in and do the harvest. So interesting. Do we have any more?
Yeah. I think that's everyone. By the way, guys, if you just hover your mouse over your name, there is a raise a hand button as well. So if you don't have a webcam, you just want to raise your hand, feel free to use that. You can also post your questions in the chat, and we'll get to them. In the meantime, I just thought of an interesting example of when Ian was mentioning Apple as a competitor. So that doesn't mean there isn't always room for third parties to come in. So, of course, it's going to be difficult to compete with them, say, in the mobile phone market, and say Android is already doing it. But in the past couple of days, something that I've been personally looking at, I've got a new laptop, and I've been looking at USB-C hubs and looking at what, because the new MacBook has the USB-C hub officially Apple provides, and comparing the price of the official one to what third parties are offering, what sort of new ports are there. It's very interesting. So these third parties are actually kind of overtaking and offering much, much better products at cheaper prices. And well, there's a huge market for it because people can see. And one of the fun things about, I think, Apple products is their cables usually just disappear in thin air after a year. So it's always fun to see what sort of competition is going on in that environment. And one more thing I was just going to mention about the SWOT analysis. I have a cousin who works at a consulting company, and he says one of the first things they do when a company reaches out to them and wants to use their services, they'll just run some SWOT analysis workshops for them. So it's a very useful tool, and it's a very powerful tool. We've been actually using it within our school to find some areas of strength and weakness within our department, and it's been very eye-opening. So just want to highlight those. Now, any questions you have, any comments? Go ahead, Yannick, you have a question?
Sorry, Suresh. I'm not really sure where to click to raise my hand on the chat.
That's okay. This works too.
Yeah, I couldn't find the button. My question
do
was...
it for raise hand, that's fine.
Okay, all right, thanks. My first question was about the difference between a segment and the customer segment and channels. Well, as I was doing the convernizer, I realized that it could be a bit confusing in my case, at least, because the system I'm planning to build will be used by buildings, by building users, basically. So those will be ideally my customers, and my segment will be there. But when I think about the revenue model, I don't want the building users to pay for it. I want
Yep.
the supplier of toilet papers to supply the system and to recover from the sale of toilet papers, basically. So it's almost like a free benefit they're offering to the users in order to secure a long-term and maybe exclusive commercial relationship. So in that case, with my client, I was a bit confused there because
that's a really quite apt model to be using to get the toilet paper suppliers to fund it. My suggestion would be look very closely at a subscription service. So you don't charge them the full cost of the device, but you supply the notification to them when something's running out.
Okay.
Your client would then be the toilet paper suppliers, who then approach the local government or councils or public authorities with a contract to supply the toilet paper, which they guarantee will be filled 90-something% of the time. All right, and that way you can keep your distance from the end consumer, which is the person who owns the facilities, and you don't need to deal with as many. Because as a small business, the more customers you have, the more work you have to do. And this is why a lot of people deal direct with wholesalers. It takes a lot of the administrative load off without, but does cost you some money in your margin. So your client would be the building owners, the toilet paper companies, who then deal with the building owners. Your category would be building owners and hygiene. Is that clearer?
Yeah, no, thank you. That's clear. Thank you.
Yeah, category and client tends to be sort of similar. The category really is referring to the industry you're dealing with and how you're going to deal with that. So your case could be subscription as a category, and public service, government ownership of the buildings would be your clients. Do we have any other questions?
Anyone else? Yes, Nancy, go ahead, please.
Typical question. Is it possible to have a copy of the presentation of today?
I've got no problem with that. I haven't done it before, but it is on the YouTube video. If you can scroll through that if you like. So it's all recorded. Would that be sufficient, or do you actually want a copy of the PowerPoints?
Well, YouTube, it's okay for me.
Okay, well, if you do want the PowerPoints, I'll just put it up on Google Drive and supply a link.
Okay.
Oh, by the way, I posted that the link to that Marketing Insider graph that Ian was showing, so the site is still available. You can access that. Yes, Yannick, go ahead, please.
My other question was regarding the unique value proposition. So when I look at the examples that you gave, basically that value proposition, it's what differentiates you from the other competitors. But if you are creating something that doesn't really exist yet, or that is new in the market, how do you define that?
Yes, you'll always have competition, because the competition in your case is the people who go around and do the cleaning and check it. So what's the advantage of that? It might be cheaper, but it's inefficient. You can only do it once or twice a day, whereas you're doing it every 10th of a second if you want. All right, so look at how things are done. If there's no product that does what yours does, look at how people cope with the problem you're trying to solve, right? And that becomes your competitor. People not wanting to change from what they're already doing.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? We're here whether we stay quiet or talk. But
well, I might bring something up. I know some of you are thinking of choosing a platform for your IoT, and looking at a Raspberry Pi or Arduinos. I would recommend looking a bit further, maybe looking into something like ESP32. because they've become fairly popular with IoT development and ESP32. I'll post some links in the chat. The good thing about ESP32 is it has an embedded Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and it has a Bluetooth, it has a BLE model in there as well. And you can also program it using Arduino's programming language if you wish. And it has a pretty good amount of processing power, which might be better than just going with a Raspberry Pi. It can make your system more condensed. We'll talk a bit more about that side of like choosing microcontroller, what sort of aspect you'll be looking at when I give my seminar, but just something to keep in mind.
While we're talking on that, I'd just like to mention that Raspberry Pis, Arduinos, they're wonderful little things for this fail fast, fail often paradigm. However, they are incredibly inefficient. Because the IDE is designed to cover a whole range of platforms and be simple, the software behind it is not optimized. So if you're running a routine on using the Arduino IDE on an Arduino board, if you rewrote that in a generic C on like one of the processors Sebastian's talking about, you would find it would be markedly quicker on the same level of processor because of the inefficiencies that you need to have with flexible platforms. So choosing the right platform is important, but there's nothing wrong with using these what we term consumer level development boards in your early prototypes. But you will want to look at improving the efficiency of those designs further down the track. And Sebastian's going to give a nice chat about that later on, because the cost of a processor sounds like it's not very much at the moment. But in production, a small increase in material costs is actually a very large increase in production costs. So once you get to the point of commercialization, it might only be 10 cents more for that processor, but it turns out to be $50 by the time you get it to a usable device. So saving every tiny little bit of money you can and not having components on a processor board that you're not going to use will save you money. It means you can put in a smaller battery because you're not draining as much power and reduce the money that way and the physical size, and has a host of other advantages in reliability, clarity of code, heat, the effect on the environment, board surface area, which again is a big component of the cost. But that's something you do right at the commercialization end. So worth keeping in mind all the way through that even though you're developing on a Arduino or Pi or one of the others, that you probably will want to look at something a little bit more specific when you reach the commercialization stage. Okay, I was actually looking for something on processing costs, efficiency.
Anish, you have your hand up. You have a question?
Yeah. Basically, regarding the Raspberry Pi, I just wanted to ask how efficient is the Raspberry Pi when we use it as a gateway, basically, to transmit the data?
It works. It's a general purpose processor. It runs Linux rather well, and it's designed to work as a fully multi-function programmable device. It is not something particularly good at switching data packets, which is what the router does. It doesn't have the ASIC, the application-specific integrated circuit that people like Cisco would use to actually handle the switching fabric that you would need for a high-speed router. But yes, it works. And a very good example of why you would look for a specific type of processor for a specific application.
And well, since we're talking about it, a good way to start would be to find a processor first, then see if there's a development board available for it. In most cases, there is. And the development board might have lots of other peripherals that you might not need for your project, but because it will be a development board, all of the pins and all of the peripherals would be available to you, so you can do a proof of concept of your idea. And then if that ends up working, the next step would be, okay, now let's go and design our own PCB for my solution, which is just a custom printed circuit board with all of the circuitry
And we
of
have
the processor.
a talk on that towards the end.
Yeah.
If you have any ideas for a topic that you would like to hear about, please let us know, and we'll produce one on that topic. Because we're more interested in doing something that you're interested in than talk about things we're interested in. Because it's all very interesting. I wish I could find that chart I've had before. Ah, there it is. I'll just see if I can copy that. Can't do images in this, can we? Not to worry, but I found a little chart which I posted on Facebook. So if you want to look me up on Facebook, you can have a look at it. But it gives the relative efficiency of each programming language. This is not particularly tied to the platform, but for instance, C has an energy rating of 1, whereas Perl has an energy of nearly 80. So if you're writing things in Perl, which is a fairly straightforward scripting language, it requires a lot of processing time, therefore energy. And it also lists the time with C again at 1 and Python at 72. So because Python is an interpreted language, it's very, very slow to run, or comparatively slow to run. And that's an interesting thing when you're looking at actually writing your code. Mr. Algorithms, have you got anything to say on compilers?
You wanted efficient use C or C#, or write your own, of course, but that's going a bit extreme.
It is. Some of the things we can do there, if you look at real development environments, not like the quick and easy IDE that comes with the Arduino boards, we'll have a look at some of them, and you get things like hotspot editing. So when your code is running, you can see where you're spending all your processing time, and that's where you're consuming power. And you go in and you make that section of code more efficient by rewriting it in a more low-level language such as C or even better assembly language. If you're not familiar with assembly language, it's great fun. It's my favorite language. Deals directly with interacting with the hardware.
I can back that up. I wrote a rather long piece of code, so about 200,000 lines at one point for my thesis. And doing a hotspot analysis came down to about 70% of the runtime was 4 lines of code. So optimizing those 4 lines had this huge impact because that little bit was called from multiple different places.
About the Arduino IDE, I have a suggestion. You can check out something called Platform IO. It's an add-on of the virtual code, and it uses the GCC for the compiling. And it also has the intelligence code, like auto-filling all the features, and it also has the debugging features. So it's much more better than the original Arduino IDE itself, and it's free.
Thanks, CP. So we're out of
what's
time.
the name?
It's
you post
what's it? Platform IO, Yiffy?
Yes, but it's an add-on of the Visual Studio Code.
I'm gonna post a link for that in the chat.
Okay.
So it's this one. Platform.
I think it's biolabs.com. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining in.
And yep, thank you. We'll catch up with you in 2 weeks. Don't be shy though. We will answer your emails to the Capstone email address as soon as we can. If you don't get a reply in a day or 2 days best, send it again so it pops back up to the top and we see it. We do get a bit inundated with emails. And there goes my Great Dane tiptoeing across the floor again. The joys of working from home. All right, thanks everyone. We'll speak
Good
again
night
soon.
or good day or good morning or whatever.
Thank you.
Good something or other.
Yes.
Okay, I'll stop the recording.